I would like to introduce you to Dr. Helene Emsellem, MD. She's a neurologist and sleep specialist with over 40 years of experience in the diagnosis and management of sleep disorders. She is old school in that she respects the need for an in-depth consultation to understand the nuances and details of each patient's sleep-wake complaint and formulate an appropriate diagnostic and treatment plan. She started the first sleep laboratory at George Washington University Medical Center while she was on the academic faculty in 1985 and has been a leader in the national sleep community for the past 20 years. She opened the Center for Sleep and Wake Disorders in 1995 and ran a dynamic sleep practice, sleep laboratory, and clinical research trials division. She has recently left and formed the Sleep Health Institute to focus on individualized patient care. Dr. Emsellem's area of interest include the full spectrum of disorders of sleep and wakefulness from adolescents to the elderly. As an active cyclist, sailor, skier, mother of 3, and grandmother of 8, she appreciates the need for optimal sleep quality to function at the level we each demand of ourselves. And I'll turn this over to her. Sleep through the ages.
Thanks so much, Esther. I appreciate it. I'm masked to protect you from me. I have a little bit of a... Can you turn my mic on? Okay. Keep talking. I can always keep talking. No problem there. I am talking. Can anybody hear me yet? Okay, that sounds like it's better. Okay, then we'll get started. So I have probably more slides than we'll get through. I just wanted to give you all some of the current science of what sleep is about, what it's doing for us, what our sleep needs and requirements. And then I have some slides about specific sleep disorders that we may not get to, but they'll be there if you want them for reference, or if we have questions, I will go over them at that point. So let's see, sleep is mandatory eventually. Invariably, once a month or so, somebody calls and says, I have not slept for 3 days. And that is probably physiologically impossible. But people's perception of whether they're asleep or not can get distorted. So they may very well fully believe that they haven't slept, even though they might have. And sleep can overtake you when you haven't had enough with what we call microsleeps that intervene when you're reading something and you get to the end of the paragraph and can't remember what the start was about, or full sleep attacks where you wake up and find out that you completely fell asleep. So there's a whole spectrum of interference that sleep can play in your day-to-day wakefulness and activities as sleep demands its time. And, I do like to say that survival is dependent on water, food, and air, and I've added sleep because it is a critical aspect of human functionality and, frankly, mammalian functionality. So what is sleep and what does it do? It restores us physically. It resets us psychologically. We learn during sleep. We grow during sleep. Caloric management is sleep dependent. A really important soundbite, but if you're struggling with getting 10 pounds off that you'd like to lose, if you're not getting adequate sleep at night, your brain goes into dangerous store fat mode and you actually store more fat for the same caloric intake. It's totally twisted, I get that, but unless you understand that, you don't know how much trouble that can cause. I used to think, as a younger, more dynamic, spit in everybody's eye kind of doc, that the longer I stayed up, the more calories I would burn and the skinnier I would be. But that is totally and completely wrong. We need sleep to manage calories correctly. So sleep is a dynamic process. It's not just one thing. You don't just go to sleep. Sleep has wakefulness, stage 1, which is a transitional stage, stage 2, deep slow wave sleep, which used to be called 3 and 4, and REM sleep. And you'll notice in this what we call sleep hypnogram here, I don't know if you can see, this pointer is not very clear, but this shows how we cycle through those stages. And the general information that you can see here is that most of the deep slow wave sleep is in the first half of the night. That restores us physically, gives us the physical power to get through the next day. And REM sleep occurs mostly in the final third of the night. And that restores our psyche, balances our mood, makes us charming, interesting, creative individuals, and not grouches. And so if people ask me, which they invariably do, if I'm not going to get enough sleep, this is like the college student question, if I'm not going to get enough sleep, should I go to bed late or wake up early? And you know, my answer is you're dinged either way, because you need the slow wave sleep to clean up the synapses so you have room for new information, and you need the REM sleep to creatively think through an answer and to have learned the information that you gathered. So I think of us, let's see what's next here. So I think of us as information gathering machines during the day, and you may be gathering the information that I'm talking about, but at the same time, you hear the background noise in the room, you may hear the person next to you fidgeting a little bit. If a siren went by, you're going to absorb that too. We just grab everything indiscriminately during the day, and we end up with cluttered heads. And part of the job of sleep is to clean up the information we've gathered, prioritize it, dump the riffraff, and send the important things to subcortical regions that'll allow you to have more cortical space to learn new things the next day. So Giulio Tononi, who's an amazing guy, who is at the University of Wisconsin last time I checked, is an Italian with a crazy Italian accent, and I won't try to imitate that for you because I can't. But basically, Giulio has done these studies that show that during the day, we're building connections, we're strengthening synapses, and if you happen to read a whole book about chess, you're going to have a whole lot of information about chess in your head. All of that may not be a priority by the end of the day. So at night, we have to downscale. We have to restore what Giulio calls synaptic homeostasis, and this enhances learning. And he likes to say that sleep is the price we pay for plasticity. So for you to have an open mind, to be clear-headed and not muddle-headed in the morning, you have to have spent enough time in these sleep stages to process the information you gathered, or there's no cortical space for new stuff and you feel like, oh, I can't think today, which I think we've all experienced at some point in time or other. So there's an interesting correlation between the amount of slow wave sleep over a certain brain region and how much time you use that region during the day. So if you learn a task that takes up a piece of your parietal lobe repeatedly, and you're doing this tennis serve repeatedly and trying to get, your tush in and your knees bent and all that stuff they keep yelling at us when we play tennis. If you're trying to do that, then all that information is there, but you don't need all of it. And so we have to downsize, and you'll see, although if we do an EEG and we look at overall brain activity, the amount of slow wave sleep looks the same everywhere. You do brain mapping experiments that look at where you're using glucose and sugar metabolism. It's highly selective, and you're cleaning up those areas more so that you're balanced for the next day. And part of that process is something that we fondly call glial washing. So the glial cells in the brain, I was taught, were supportive network cells when I was a resident in the dark ages, also the source of nasty glioblastomas, bad nasty tumors, and I never thought they had much function. Now what we know is those glial cells are filtering the spinal fluid, bathing all the neurons and cleaning up the toxic metabolic waste products from the day's metabolism, including, here's the interesting part, the accumulation of amyloid proteins, which are associated with Alzheimer's disease. So you've got to clean up at night. You've got to clean up your spinal fluid, the cerebrospinal fluid in the head. You've got to filter it. You've got to get the toxic metabolic waste out. And that also helps you reset and feel like you're awake and alert the next day. So REM sleep, totally different type of sleep, occurs every 90 to 120 minutes. If we wake people up from REM, invariably they're dreaming, and invariably they're pleasant, wacky dreams. So we wake up from frightening nightmares, which are the unpleasant REM dreams, but if we wake people up selectively in a lab environment, 90% of REM dreams are totally pleasant and bizarre. There's strange spatial relationships. There may be somebody from second grade in there and somebody else in the dream. And exactly what all that means, we don't really know, and I wouldn't stand up here and pretend that I do know. But what we do know is that REM sleep restores your psyche, balances your mood, creativity and learning, REM dependent. So this clears your head cognitively to give you a clean slate to work from. And most of the REM occurs in the latter portion of the night, as we mentioned. And we dream during REM, we learn during REM. This is a great experiment, but probably from a time perspective, I don't have time. But if you get a chance, Robert Stickold, this is referenced on here, Robert Stickold at Harvard, he's a fabulous speaker. He loves to mush the microphone when he's speaking so you can't hear what he's saying. He's an animal, totally, and brilliant. But Bob Stickold has done a whole series of experiments. His first round of these, more than 20 years ago. This is 2000, well, almost 20 years ago when this was his TEDx talk on it, but it was 20 years ago when he did this work. He took Harvard students who didn't know how to play the game Tetris. And a lot of your kids have probably played Tetris. Tetris is a computer game where you have wedges of blocks and you have to orient them so they fill the grid. And the better you fill the grid, the higher the score. Really easy test to do, to have a score at the end of a 5-minute session automatically and see how well you fill the grid. So here's what Robert Stickold hypothesized, that there is enhancement of learning even if you don't repeat the task for 2 to 3 days afterward, as long as you get adequate sleep. Adequate for these college students, absolute minimum 7 hours. For us guys too, actually. And he looked at this and he taught this group of kids how to play Tetris in the morning. He tested one group, that was Monday morning. He tested one group Monday afternoon, another group Tuesday morning, Wednesday morning, and Thursday morning. So, you know, I was in one of the first lectures that he gave for this, and he said, so which group do you want to be in? So I gave it away already, but, you know, I'm like the perpetual person who can always answer a multiple choice wrong. So I shoot my hand up. I want to be in the first group, because if I just learned it, I have the hand-eye coordination. I think I'm going to do better than waiting until the next morning. Wrong, wrong, and wrong. There is an incremental improvement in performance over 2 to 3 nights as long as you get adequate sleep. The amount of sleep drops below 7 hours, definitely below 6.5. The learning curve is totally flat. So I'm forever talking to college students and medical students, my own daughter when she was a medical student, you know, just get enough sleep the night before the exam. You're not going to be able to think adequately. So my daughter calls me the last day of the last exam of the second year of medical school. She says, Mom, you're not going to believe it. I said, oh God, what now? She says, I slept 8 hours last night and I got 100 on my last test. I said, you go, girl. Shame you didn't try it 2 years ago, right? So hard to convince anybody of these facts, but really, really very powerful facts. So we learn in REM. Sleep requirements, 7 to 9 hours for adults and for older adults as well. So I see 7 hours as the lower legal limit. We don't see that many people absent medical problems who need 9 hours. There are some out there, but 7 to 8 hours is where most people fall. And that sleep requirement doesn't really change much with aging. It could change with concurrent medical conditions that knock you down and leave you more tired, for sure. But healthy stays about the same. A wacky number on here, where I'm going to Fairfax County once again tonight to politic to change the junior high start times. The average teenager needs 9.25 hours of sleep with a range of 8 to 10 hours, and 8 is really on the bottom of that edge. So I always tell people, try to frame a lights out time in bed of 7.25 to 7.5 hours, so there's time to get up and pee if you have to pee, and take a sip of water if you need to, but so that you have enough time to fulfill your sleep requirement, because it's working to make you more functional. Now, this U-shaped curve in the bottom right here is kind of interesting. This is mortality and sleep duration. And this upside down U-curve says that people who sleep less than 6.5 hours and more than 9 hours don't live as long as everybody else. Nobody understands why. It's not because if you separate out ongoing other medical illnesses, that's not really the variable there. So that's a fascinating finding that we're still trying to understand. But that curve has been demonstrated repeatedly in the literature. So what happens when we get older? So sleep, the timing of sleep stays about the same. Your sleep requirement stays about the same. It may take longer to fall asleep at the beginning of the night. So this is a 1 hour block, so this is probably about 25 minutes. Might take a little longer to fall asleep, maybe harder to get comfortable. You may have a little ache in your shoulder or here or there in terms of getting comfortable and getting settled. And, and there's less slow wave sleep. This is an interesting soundbite. You see the slow wave sleep here is not showing up as 22% of the night like it was before. But there are people who now contest this. When we get dynamic, cognitively intact 95-year-olds, they are still getting 20% of their night in deep slow wave sleep. So I'm not sure I believe that soundbite, but what is definitely true is that there's more fragmentation. You're going to wake up more times, there are going to be more interruptions than there were 15, 20 years ago. And that could be because your shoulder hurts, that could be because you have to pee, there's a whole litany of reasons why. If you're menopausal, it could be because you're flashing. Even if you're not menopausal, some people keep flashing, which is irritating, and that goes on and on and on. Now, this next soundbite down here is kind of an interesting one. All of the literature says that the older we get, the better we tolerate being sleep restricted. I'm not sure how much I believe that, but it's written all over the place and substantiated. So we seem to be a little more robust in being able to tolerate being sleep restricted, but sleep is absolutely critical for normal cognition and thinking, and it plays it plays a role in ensuring normal thinking. Yes?
On that first one, it could be that older people don't move around as much, don't have a lot of activities, and so they're kind of resting during the day.
Well, I mean, if you use up too much of your sleep requirement during the day, it's going to be harder to consolidate sleep at night. But even when you're not napping a lot during the day, you know, the older we get, the more we wake up because of the hip, the shoulder, the this and that. But I think that's a piece of it as well. So what happens if we don't get enough sleep? I mean, everything under the sun is really the easiest answer to that. There's increased incidence of hypertension, high blood pressure, heart disease, diabetes, increased stroke risk, increased risk of obesity and not managing calories, as we spoke about. There's a crazy relationship between insufficient sleep and glaucoma, and there's an increased risk of infection. We need adequate sleep to fight off the grub out there that we keep getting exposed to. And headaches are an absolutely ubiquitous symptom among people who don't get enough sleep. And then, one of the most delicate things that we have out there is our mood and keeping our mood balanced. And keeping the mood balanced in the setting of insufficient sleep is a real tough one. We get irritable, edgy, grouchy. We're likely to snap before we think and irritate somebody that we didn't want to. And there's a higher incidence of depression. Social implications, you get tired if you didn't get enough sleep. Then you can't get to your bridge game at 9 o'clock in the morning, and then you're not doing what you want to be doing. Difficulty with interpersonal relationships. If you're tired and irritable, you're not going to think through it carefully enough before you open your mouth, which is my theme song in life with my husband. But crashes. We like to call car accidents crashes because crashes happen not as accidents. These happen because we are sleep restricted and your reaction times are slowed and you may not be able to get out of the way quickly enough. So there's an increased risk of crashes. And risk-taking behaviors, we see this as a big deal in teenagers who are more likely to use drugs and nicotine, stimulants and alcohol. But we see more alcohol use and other use of risky drugs, even in the elderly as well. And your golf game is going to suffer for this, the tennis performance is going to suffer. Someone measured the speed of the UCLA girls' tennis serves after 8 hours of sleep and after 6.5 hours of sleep, and you want to play them after 6.5 hours of sleep so you can clobber them. It's a huge difference. And poor work performance, if you're still trying to work and you're getting a couple hours of work in, can you stay focused on the task? Can you get it done the way you'd like to? And we talked a little bit about prolonged wakefulness driving calories into the cell as a very primitive survival response that people believe has been there since caveman days. So if caveman didn't get enough sleep, he stored more calories for the same input, which helped him survive the saber-toothed tiger and whatever else he had to deal with. So this is, I think, an interesting factoid slide. I'll try to get through it and make it make sense for you. So moderate sleep restriction to 6 hours a night over 2 weeks. This is not outrageous. We see people doing this all the time. But moderate sleep restriction down to 6 hours a night over 2 weeks results in serious impairment in waking cognitive function when we do sustained attention tasks and detailed tests of your cognition. So cumulative wakefulness has a neurobiological cost that you pay that accumulates over time. What's fascinating about this is over the years, I have seen so many people on 6 hours sleep nodding off in front of me in the office and telling me, I'm fine, I'm really fine. So what happens is, despite the fact that the subjective sense of sleepiness plateaus, so there's a point where your brain protects you from perceiving how tired you are so you can keep functioning in case you are running away from the saber-toothed tiger. But nonetheless, the patient becomes less and less aware of how impaired they are, which makes them crazy dangerous. Get on the road, I feel fine, I slept 6 hours last night, it's enough for me. Don't believe it for a minute, and you don't want to be on the road with them. Wakefulness in excess of 17 hours. So if you need, if you need 7 hours of sleep a night, then you are going to be blessed with 17 hours of wakefulness in the balance of things. Wakefulness in excess of 17 hours predicts cognitive performance lapse on these sustained attention tests we do. And this is a hot one. Greater than 18 hours of sustained wakefulness results in impaired driving, and people will drive drunk on driving tests. So judgment is impaired, we need our sleep. That's the message in it. So now I sold you on that, I hope. So then the question becomes, how does your brain know when to turn sleep on? How do you get to sleep? How does that magic happen? So there are several processes that have to interact in a positive way for that to happen. So one is what we call the homeostatic sleep drive, which says that We are only good for a certain number of hours of wakefulness. So if you need 8 hours of sleep a night, you're going to be good for 16 hours of alertness, and your brain is going to create 16 hours of alertness even if you want to go to bed earlier, because the wake-up time is the guidepost for where the cycle is going to get set. So process S says how many hours you've been awake. We think you're building up adenosine in the background. It's a little controversial how your brain knows how many hours you've been awake, but trust me, it knows, and it knows where that set point is. And then the second process that interacts with this, sometimes in a positive way and sometimes in a negative way, is what we call the day-night cycle, or process C, clock-dependent alertness, which simply put says, we are not rats. We are not supposed to be awake in the middle of the night. We're supposed to be awake during the day and asleep at night. And that's the biology of who we are. Now, I mean, we need physicists to run the satellites up there and be up at night, so people have to jump out of those boxes at times. But process C says that we're supposed to be awake during the day and asleep at night. Your body temperature rhythms interact with this in a way that's very hard to sort out. And there's a rhythm of lots of other hormones that interacts with this. And then there's genetics. So on top of all of this, there are some night owls out here who like to go to bed at 2 and wake up at 10 and have done it their whole lives. And I'm probably not going to change them. And trying to change that is a tough one. There's some early morning larks who like to go to bed at 9 and get up at 4:30. And that happens more frequently as you get older. And it does leave you a little more out of sync because there's more to do at night than at 4:30 in the morning. So there's the genetic issues of what are you going to blame mom and dad for? So they're night owls. And then the one variable that you can control is habit. And how do you manage your sleep-wake pattern? So this homeostatic sleep drive says the brain is keeping track of your hours of wakefulness during the course of the day. It's ticking off the hours. It's not going to let you get sleepy till you've used that quota of wakefulness up. So your brain takes the wake-up time and thinks forward from there for when it's going to let you go to sleep. So there's, frankly, a limited number of hours of functional sustained alertness at 15 to 17 hours. If we need 7 to 9 hours of sleep, that's what we got blessed with. Extended duration of sustained alertness correlates with impaired functionality. So you start to push over that line and you're up for 18 and a half hours. You know, you can try to write an essay, you can try to write a letter to your grandchild. Don't try to drive your car. I may be on the road. I don't want to be out there with you at that point. So this process C, this clock-dependent alertness, is fascinating. And I'm going to skip over this but show you this. There is, you know, in your retina you have rods and cones that see angles and color. There's a third set of receptors in the retina called the photopic receptors that see light dark. These are very primitive receptors. We believe they've been there since the dawn of man. I don't know how you carbon date a receptor, but I have to believe the molecular biologists. And those receptors see light streaming into the eye, and they send a signal to the hypothalamus, critical control zone, sleep, don't sleep, eat, don't eat, procreate, don't procreate in the hypothalamus. And it says, it is light out. Keep this person awake. And as we get into dusk and the dimming of light at the end of the day, those alerting signals from that retinohypothalamic pathway diminish gradually over the 2 hours between full daylight and dusk and darkness. And that is a huge signal to the brain to release the suppression of melatonin so that we can begin to secrete melatonin and fall asleep on a rising melatonin level. Now, you can try taking melatonin, but taking exogenous melatonin doesn't honestly do very much good. So there are some compounds that bind to different receptors that we've been fooling with in research, but there's clearly a huge relationship between light and the timing of sleep. The other soundbite here that's important is that those receptors, those photopic receptors, are exquisitely sensitive to short frequency blue light. So, that may not be something that you know much about. I have to know a lot about it now because light is a drug that promotes wakefulness. You have to think about this way. You can't stay awake in the evening doing stuff, reading, watching TV, tons of blue light, computer, tons of blue light, your energy efficient LED bulbs, almost all blue light, and it's screaming, stay awake, stay awake, stay awake. Then you turn the light switch off and you say, I want to go to sleep now. But your brain says, where's my 2 hours of dusk for me to prepare for that? And that's where we get into trouble. And so I think of light a la Charles Czeisler, who runs the sleep medicine clinic and circadian rhythm lab at Harvard, who said this in a board meeting that I was sitting at. And he usually loses me after the first sentence or two, but I wrote it down. Light is a drug that promotes wakefulness. And we live in a 24/7 lit society. And in 10 years, there will probably be departments of chronobiology in medical schools looking at timing issues for when to give chemotherapy, timing issues for when cells are optimally functioning or suboptimally functioning. So this 24/7 lit society we live in is a huge problem. We lose our sleep-wake cues because we're bathed in light all evening. We're not living outside. We don't have dusk. And we have lights from screens. And, if you say, well, I'm just on my phone, it's a small screen. If you look at the lumens of light that your phone is putting out, it's about the same as the TV across the room. So don't delude yourself about that. There are more distractors. Then, we travel internationally and we spit in the eye of circadian rhythms by jumping across circadian time zones. And we see a lot of night owls develop once you retire and you don't have to be in the office at 8 o'clock in the morning anymore. And a lot of people get the, I just don't have to do it attitude. And then they come see me, well, I don't have to get up because I'm not going anywhere, but I can't get to my bridge game now. And I need a better balance than this. So we have to put it back together again. So, when babies are out there, we are very meticulous about not upsetting our babies. They scream really loudly, and we don't want to mess with them. We put them to sleep at about the same time. We put them in the same environment. We sing them the same song. They smell their smelly blankie, and they know it didn't work very well screaming all night last night. We're just going to go to sleep. So we live now in a land where all those bedroom cues are kind of gone, and gone. We've got light in the bedroom everywhere, engagement in the bedroom. And, some of this is good, but it does interfere with sleep. And don't think this is not just a teenager's problem. Light interferes with sleep in modern society in every single age group out there. So I'm going to take, how much? Do we have a little bit more time? They disappeared. They're not going to. Okay. Yeah, so a circadian phase is where is your body clock set? So if your body clock is set for sleeping 8 hours from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., we would call that your sleep phase. If you don't have to get up at a regimented time in the morning and you retire and you say, I'm not going to do it anymore, your whole sleep schedule can slip way out of whack. Now, I have to say, in your age group, you guys wrap this up and clean it up really quickly. My teenagers, it's life-threatening to get it straightened out. But, once you understand what's going on, your brain takes the wake-up time and is going to think forward 16 hours. And if you woke up at 11 o'clock in the morning, you're just not going to get sleepy till, 3 o'clock in the morning. And then you're going to be stuck in that loop reinforcing itself. So I'm going to skip this because it's mostly for teenagers. So what kind of habits do you need to help you sleep better? Oh my goodness, I hate keeping a regular schedule. I hate anybody telling me, you got to go to bed at this time and wake up at that time. This is what's good for you. It's kind of like my blood starts to boil and I rage against it. But the most important thing you can do is keep a regular schedule. Find a schedule that works for you and stick to it like glue. I mean, it gets out of whack by a half an hour here or there, fine. You pull it back together again. But regular schedule is all about this. Daily exercise. So people who exercise regularly sleep better across the board. And that doesn't mean you have to jog 5 miles a day, but getting down there and getting 20, 30 minutes of exercise 4 or 5 days a week is good. You need a little bit of wind down, me time too. If you don't clear your head at the end of the day, it's hard to settle down and go to sleep. You don't want to be rehashing what your charming daughter said to you at 3 o'clock in the afternoon when you're trying to go to sleep at 11 o'clock at night. Maybe your daughters are more charming than mine. Anyway, dim screens and reduce ambient light. And you can specifically filter blue light out of your environment. So if you're having trouble falling asleep on time, you can get these UVEX orange lens glasses that are shown there. They're like $10 on Amazon, and you can wear them at midnight and try to go to sleep put them on at 10 p.m. and try to go to sleep at midnight to block blue light. So orange lenses block alerting blue light. Your iPhone has something called a night shift program. So if you're mostly on your phone after 10, you can set the night shift program to filter out blue light. The Droids have a low blue light setting on most of them so that you can get this filtered out. Your Windows computer has night light settings. If any of you get bungled up and need some help with this, you can shoot me an email. I left my email on the front of this. And you should begin filtering blue light out about 2 hours before the desired sleep onset time.
That means turn the TV off.
Well, or put your orange lenses on. So the orange lenses are going to block it. Now, I would argue that you don't want to be watching, some of this really provocative garbage on TV. But if you like to watch Friends and an episode of Friends and you find that to be soothing, that's great. Watching anxiety-provoking death and destruction, not a good idea at bedtime at all. The avoidance of caffeine and chocolate is very personally specific. I cannot eat chocolate after 2 o'clock. I'll pick it up and I'll go, oh my God, I'm going to be dinged if I eat this. I will be sitting there at 1 o'clock in the morning, doo-dah, trying to think of a paper to write. So you have to know yourself with this. I tell people to be careful about these things between 2 and 4 p.m. And chocolate can be very provocative. It's not just caffeine. And clear the decks. You want to have a comfortable environment. If the bedroom's a mess and it's aggravating, or your housemate complains about it and gets you aggravated right before you're going to go to sleep, not a good scenario to go to sleep in. And eating patterns become important. So as we retire, we tend to eat a little bit later a lot of the time, yet late food has you metabolizing late, and it's going to delay sleep onset. If you're happy with the time you're falling asleep, great. If you're not happy with the time you're falling asleep, try to move the meal a little bit earlier, or try to have the bigger meal midday and a lighter meal for dinner. There's a lot of ways to manipulate that. Alcohol is highly deceptive. Alcohol is a little bit disinhibiting, and people will feel relaxed a little bit and find it easier to fall asleep with alcohol at bedtime. But it kicks you in the butt and it disturbs the latter half of the night's sleep. So what I usually say is, if you like to have a glass of wine a day and you've earned that over your lifetime, that's great. Get it done by 7 so that the bulk of it's out of your system later on. We don't want the alcohol and its sedating effects promoting sleep, because that's more likely to disrupt sleep. And this is a cause of the 2 and 3 a.m. awakenings, which sometimes have a life of their own, but can be triggered by that as well. Heavy discussions at bedtime, Some spouses just want to get into it as soon as you get in bed. You have to set some ground rules to keep it quiet. If you're traveling a lot, then you're going to upset the entire apple cart by going to Europe and getting 6 hours out of sync. And when you go there, it's going to feel fine, and coming back, it's going to be brutal. I always tell people you can try to shift an hour or two closer to the schedule that you're going to, and then don't pack your schedule in too tightly in the first 2 days so that you can get the sleep you need to get synced in to the schedule. And anytime you can travel for 10 days rather than just 5 to 7, it's going to be easier. Here in the States, it is so easy to fly to California because you get 3 extra hours in your life, and you come home and you are dinged like there's no tomorrow because you lost those same 3 hours and also spent the whole day on the plane. So this was a slide I made a while ago. New on the horizon was a drug by Vanda for jet lag. Unfortunately, they studied it. We did some of the studies with them. They submitted it to the FDA, and the FDA didn't like some procedural stuff. They have not gotten around to doing it again, which is a tragedy from my perspective. There are also some apps that you can get to calculate what time you're going to, time zone-wise, that'll tell you 5 days before you should try to shift here and there. Not so easy to actually functionally do. So we are at 2:46, and the rest of this talk is just some vignettes about sleep apnea, insomnia, restless legs, daytime sleepiness, and REM sleep behavioral disorder. I can pass on it and answer questions now. I can blast through it if you want me to. Your choice. Yes, sir.
You talk entirely about sleep at night. What about naps? Does nap time count as part of the hours you're counting, or does the nap during the day interfere with sleep at night?
So naps count, and they can count in a positive way or they can interfere. So if your typical bedtime is midnight to 8 and you decide to take a nap at 10, you're going to get powered up from that hour-long nap, not be able to fall asleep, and it's going to throw your whole cycle off. If you nap in the sweet spot, which is between 2 and 5 in the afternoon, in the siesta time of the day, great time to take a 45-minute nap if you're feeling like you need it. And there's some interesting data about this, but over age 80, our ability to sustain alertness for 16 solid hours crashes and burns. And the more consistently you plug a nap into your schedule so that your body has the expectation of taking the nap, the easier it'll be to fall asleep, and I would alarm yourself. If you nap for 2 hours, you're going to wake up feeling this, what we call sleep drunkenness. It feels really grudgy. So I like naps in the 20 to 40 minute range, optimally between 2 and 5 in the afternoon, and thank you for asking that. Sorry I left that out. Yes, sir.
Doctor, many people, including many people in this room, will lie awake at night unable to get to sleep. Now, what exactly is the value of that? What happens to the body? How much is it good for you to be awake at night, not sleeping in your bed?
Well, I mean, one of the things that's really important here with that wake up during the night is that often it's overestimated by the patient because we're not real good at measuring time during the night. So what I say about that is, if you think you're up for more than 10 minutes, I love for you to plug an earbud in or an ear loop or a headband speaker or a pillow speaker, listen to some music, a TED Talk, something to distract yourself. Lying in bed in the dark, wondering, why am I getting dinged and why can't I go to sleep at night, gets you agitated, and that's not any good. But staying there is important because we find that you waft in and out of sleep. And so I'm a big fan after 10 minutes, get up and pee, don't argue with your bladder. If you're hungry, don't argue with your stomach. Get some nuts or some yogurt, but then get back in bed in the dark. Minimize the amount of light when you get up, and then plug something in. Listening is the least engaging activity that we have to distract us at night. And I'm a huge fan of TED Talks. There is a wacky TED Talk on just about everything out there. And the idea when you choose something to listen to at night when you're stuck awake is you want something that's interesting enough to listen to, but not so fascinating that it would be tragic if you fell asleep while you were listening. So it's a balance, and a balancing act for that. But listening, I think, is a wonderful thing to do, and just lying in the dark is really mind-boggling. Yes, ma'am?
Do you think melatonin has any effect on taking before sleep?
So melatonin, the question is, does melatonin have any effect on sleep? Melatonin has been shown to have two possible effects. It can impact the timing of sleep when it's taken hours before the bedtime in very little doses, and it has a very mild soporific effect to push you into sleep when taken at bedtime. So the way I handle this, if I'm at a cocktail party and somebody finds out I'm a sleep doctor, there's always the melatonin question. And so my first response is, do you think it helps you? If they think it helps, I say, benign, keep doing it. If it doesn't help, I say, duh. So it's not going to help a lot of people. So there are multiple different melatonin receptors, and the over-the-counter melatonin sort of smears the receptors but is not sufficiently selective. This drug tasimelteon that we use to adjust timing of sleep in blind people is very selective for receptors, and maybe someday we'll have that more available to us. Yes, sir?
Taking the net, is that if you're up all night and this goes on for periods of time, is there any you can take the Nesta, which should gives you 8 hours of sleep. Is that good or bad?
The judicious use of hypnotic medications when you're doing all the behavioral things to stay aligned with that can be very helpful. As long as you're not experiencing side effects, we do like to make sure you're on the minimum effective dose and you're using it when you do need it, and not just helter-skelter on a nightly basis. So their cognitive behavioral interventions for insomnia talk about, not getting in bed till you're ready to go to sleep. If you're having trouble falling asleep, insomniacs commit the major sin of often getting in bed earlier and earlier and earlier, which makes for more and more insomnia. So looking at how the whole behavioral pattern is working, and I love the combination of looking at it behaviorally and kicking it in the butt a little bit with the medication, and then hopefully reducing that medication dose to a minimum.
I have a question. Can you just speak a few words on REM sleep behavior disorder?
Yes, I can. Hold on, So the REM sleep behavioral disorder is an unusual phenomenon. So we are supposed to be paralyzed in REM sleep. With the REM sleep behavioral disorder, there is a failure of the normal paralysis of REM sleep. And people can respond motorically, yelling, kicking, pushing, jumping out of bed, to the content of dreams. You are supposed to be flat out paralyzed during REM sleep. If the paralysis of REM sleep fails, you are at risk at night of major injury, because you can respond motorically to the content of your dream, which you're not supposed to be seeing much of to begin with, right? So this can occur in males a bit more than females, typically often over age 50, and we see this in a couple of scenarios. We see it in patients with obstructive sleep apnea that's not being adequately treated, and treating the apnea can settle it down. We see it with Parkinson's disease and other multisystem atrophy and other brainstem degenerative disorders. Interestingly, you may get put on an SSRI antidepressant to manage your mood for any number of reasons, and the SSRI antidepressant can trigger episodes of REM sleep behavioral disorder, and then we have to go back to the drawing board and adjust the medications. Higher incidence, interestingly enough, in narcolepsy and there's a lot of leg movements in people who have this disorder. I mean, it's characterized by somebody just getting up and, not really being awake, not responsive, but yelling, thrashing around, often not making sense. Not a word may come out coherent, but a lot of it's incoherent. Patients can throw themselves out of bed with this. I have a patient who's dislocated his shoulder. I have a lovely little lady in her 80s who leaped out of bed, ran through her living room, flew over the coffee table, fractured her entire jaw. And when I met her, she was trying to figure out what was wrong, but she was coping with this by using a cat collar to strap herself to the posts of her bed. So people are not always getting to their docs and getting these things managed properly. There are treatments, even if we can't change drugs or change the disease process you have. Clonazepam seems to work for this. There's a subset of people who believe that high-dose melatonin works. I'm not one of them, but there's data out there about that as well. But I think the mantra for me is that the new onset of dreaming in adulthood is something that always needs to be investigated. So you could have more dreams because you're on a different kind of blood pressure medication. You can have more dreams because you're having REM sleep behavioral disorder. But however much dream content you've remembered during your lifespan should remain in that status quo throughout your life. And if that changes, it's a big deal. And these episodes, when they're flagrant, you don't want me to play a video of that because it's disturbing to watch, but they are. You don't want to be in the bedroom with it.
Is it normal for people not to remember their dreams?
So depending on how awake they get after the episode, so there's several house rules with REM sleep behavioral disorder. If you have a partner who is doing this and getting up and yelling during the night and thrashing about, your job is to get out of the bed, get to the doorway, turn on the lights, stay as far away as possible so you don't get a fist thrown at you, and call to them to wake them up. And then call your doctor in the morning. Yes, sir.
Sometimes I find myself. More often than not, sometimes I'm dreaming and I'm having very stressful dreams. I'm looking around for something, or something's lost, or one thing or another, and then I wake up and I'm maybe still stressed out. What's the approach to that? Is it just...
Unfortunately, very normal. I mean, if you get a provocative enough dream that's bugging your psyche, you're going to wake up from it. And then I think if you meditate, it's a good idea to try to meditate and clear your head. Maybe put on an iPod and listen to some music to try not to go back down into the same bloody dream that aggravated you to begin with. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry I missed the beginning, so you might have addressed this, but if you're somebody who's been consistently not getting enough sleep, is that a permanent thing, or can you change that? I mean, how does it affect your brain over time?
Well, it's not good for your brain over time, and you can change it. You can change it by shifting gently. So you don't want to move the bedtime too early. You don't want to move the wake-up time too late. You want to just maybe grab 15 minutes at either end, look at where you're sleeping, and try to enhance the relaxation procedures transitioning into sleep to try to get more sleep.
Anybody else? Okay. Excuse me. Would you please address restless leg syndrome?
It's a separate hour lecture. So, true restless leg syndrome is a miserable condition where you have this, as soon as you settle and get quiet, you have this building compulsion to move your legs. And a lot of people experience it on an airplane or in a car, but most commonly just when you get in bed to go to sleep. And there's a building tension and need to move, and as hard as you try not to move, the more likely you're going to move. So there's some interesting data about RLS. There is a lot of data showing that RLS can be seen when there is insufficient iron in certain regions of the brain. So we measure ferritin levels and make sure that ferritin levels are high enough. Often hard to get ferritin levels up there where we want them. Sometimes iron infusions are required. And there's some other treatments that are helpful for it. A lot of people get put on the Parkinsonian drugs by their primary care doctors, and those are a miserable dead end. The Mirapex and those drugs tend to be associated with augmentation over time, and they don't get better. But Lyrica, which is another neural enhancing drug, sometimes is helpful. The opioids can be helpful, but we're in a culture now where we don't want to prescribe opioids, but there are ways to treat it. And the boundary for when you treat and don't treat is really how much is it interfering with your sleep.
How about quinine? I've heard that some people take that.
So quinine and this preparation called Quin-Am, which was quinine and aminophylline over years ago, used to be a wonderful drug, but mostly for leg cramps, more so than restless leg syndrome. And even so, you just have to be careful how much quinine you drink.
I'm dreaming a lot. My dreams are always early in the morning, bad one and beautiful one. But maybe I said because I said I'm eating always up when I'm hungry in the night, 3 o'clock, 3:30, 4 o'clock, I get up and have a bowl of cereal. And I wonder, and then I fall asleep. I wonder if that one make me dream very early in the morning.
I'm not sure that I would blame the bowl of cereal on that. There's some tryptophan in it. You may want to adjust your caloric intake at bedtime so you're not waking up at 3 in the morning starved. But I don't think that the cereal is causing the dreaming.
Hi, Dr. Emsellem. My name is Brett Scola, and I might be one of the few people in the room who's a patient of yours and your family. And I always like to publicly thank Dr. Emsellem for the amazing work that she has done for my daughter and my family, because she has some significant sleep issues. So always like to thank you.
Very, very welcome. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting.
Okie doke. Good. All right.